This episode of the RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by the BC Centre for Agritech Innovation at Simon Fraser University. Are you ready to grow your farm business with cutting-edge technologies and innovative solutions? Our centre will drive you towards an advanced future. Get the investment, expertise, and support you need to test and develop your products or ideas through our Agritech Development Program. Google SFU Agritech Innovation to learn more.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Wednesday midweek edition of the show. It is already December 20th. Yeah, we're running out of days, gentlemen. And I guarantee you our female audience they're way ahead of us when it comes to the Christmas shopping. I know they are. That's probably statistically a fact. Gentlemen, we are running out of days. So let's get to work here. Thank you so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your work day. It is great to be with you here today. Also, thanks for everybody downloading the RealAg Radio podcast. When I look at the podcast numbers, I'll tell you what, RealAgriculture, across all the different podcasts we produce, this show, The Agronomist, We Pete's Word, RealAg Markets, we're going to hit 1 million downloads in 2024, which is spectacular. Big thanks to everybody that is subscribed to all of our different podcasts that we're producing here at RealAgriculture, all of you out there in Canada and the U.S. Today on the show, we got a bit of a special treat. Ann Wasko will be here for a beef market update. It is not Friday. It is Wednesday. Don't worry. You don't need to check your calendar and say, what day am I listening to this show? It's Wednesday, and the holiday season, the festive season, the Christmas season has thrown the schedule for a bit of a loop. So Ann will be here today. We're going to look ahead a little bit to 2024. What are some of those key indicators, those signals that we are watching from a cattle producer perspective on the ranch and in the feed yard? So we'll talk about that. We'll also be joined today by Matt Makens with Makens Weather. He's based in Denver, Colorado. Love talking to Matt. I'm hoping he has some good stories to tell. Really, Canada has been, for the most part, warm. Okay. Now, there has been some days where, it snowed or it rained. We have had some nasty weather, but it hasn't been sustained. Overall, it's been a pretty mild weather for Canada. And that's right. We haven't been able to get our igloos set up yet and things like that. So it's a real challenge for all you that like to make the Canada winter jokes. But it's been mild. But really, that's fine. What we really need is on the western half of the country and into the U.S., we really need some spring moisture early, okay? So we'll talk to Matt about that. We'll also find out what the heck's going on in eastern Canada and central Canada and the eastern Corn Belt and find out what some of the weather indications are there as well. Been fairly wet, so that's definitely been a challenge for some of you that are trying to finish up some of that corn harvest. If you have any feedback on today's show, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also, of course, call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Yesterday, the Canadian government put out their plan for what's going to happen with EVs in the country. Now, it's a staged approach, but they're basically saying that passenger vehicles, by the time we get to 2035, will all be electric. Now, I'm skeptical here. And I have said, I think previously on the show, and I tweeted about it yesterday, I kind of refuse to get outraged about this and really worry about it too much, as people have been asking me what I think about this, because I just don't think it's going to happen. The president of I think it was the Canadian Auto Parts Association. I probably got that screwed up. But anyway, somebody in the auto industry, they supply all the parts to the automakers. He talked about how they weren't consulted. He talked about how OEMs The car manufacturers themselves, there lacked to be some consultation there with them. Of course, we have electrical challenges. We've got urban versus rural. One of the there's the distance factor. I tweeted yesterday that, and I've considered an EV. I live in a city of over 100,000 people. The studio is a 10-minute drive from my house. I've considered before about getting an EV for a commuter vehicle. Okay, staying inside the city. Many of you don't do that. You don't have a commute. Many of you are going long distances, as like I am, driving to different areas across rural Canada and the U.S. in my Jeep that I have. I would never, if I was going long distances, I would never have an EV. What an inconvenience at this point based on the infrastructure, the lack of infrastructure. And I think many of you feel that way. The other overlying fact is the cold. Typically, we haven't had it yet, but the cold Canadian harsh winter. Same thing goes for states like Wyoming and Utah and Montana. You're probably thinking the same thing. To me, there is a little bit of a rural or a lack of consideration for some of the constraints here in rural Canada. I think that's a thing. I also wonder if we're not going to see, like, when we get to let's just say this policy actually still exists in 2034. Okay, which I highly doubt it, because we've already heard the Conservatives are going to repeal it if they win the next election, which they are favored to do at this point. Another reason I'm not going to get outraged. Let's just say it's still in place. Okay. Think about the run. Think about with Tier 4 engines, what happened. There was like this run on older models that had Tier 3. I think we would see huge demand for new vehicles, and I put new in quotations, or even used vehicles prior to that 2035 date. The other thing I wonder, with so many Canadians living so close to the U.S. border, like high majority, what is it, like over 80% of our population lives within 100 kilometers of the U.S. border. I wonder if they're going to try to tackle preventing people from bringing used, or making it more difficult to bring used vehicles or even new vehicles out of the U.S. into Canada. Because think about it. Do I want to have to be forced to buy an EV passenger vehicle in Canada? Do I want to be forced to do that? Or do I just drive, 2.5 hours down to Great Falls, Montana, and buy a used or even new vehicle, bring the new one back, gas powered, because they don't have a regulation like this. If there's in many cases, there's not a duty, but you got to pay the GST, got to pay the currency exchange. And that's going to be common too, I think. Now, somebody had tweeted me and said, like, they're going to shut that down. Can they inside the USMCA? Now, that could be a big... There's a lot of constraints here, and I don't mean to be something that's just bringing up a bunch of barriers. I understand what they're trying to achieve. I think this is putting a big goal on the wall and a lack of the plan to actually make all of this happen. But hey, you tell me what you think about yesterday's announcement. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. And passenger vehicles not going out. You could see more people buying diesel trucks. People are stubborn. Like, as much as that seems like it's all ridiculous, people are stubborn. Okay? They are stubborn. This is going to be a more difficult change. Now, for some people, it's an easy change. For others, not so much. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're talking weather with Matt Makens of Makens Weather right after this.
FP Genetics relentlessly brings innovative new seed genetics to Canadian farms, ensuring growers, breeders, and farmers are supported and viable. Being a valued partner on your farm for decades, you can expect the continuous pursuit of the best genetics. Visit fpgenetics.ca to discover FP's strong portfolio of wheat, durum, barley, oats, peas, and rye, or contact your local FP seed dealer or territory manager to discuss your certified seed strategy specific to your region.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Shaun Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on SiriusXM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today.
Let's dive into a discussion about weather here right before Christmas. This segment's brought to you by FP Genetics, innovative seed genetics for Canadian farmers. Contact your local FP seed dealer or territory manager to discuss your certified seed strategy specific to your region. Visit fpgenetics.ca to learn more. Okay, let's jump into a discussion here, as I mentioned, about weather, and we're joined right now by Matt Makens from Makens Weather, based out of Denver, Colorado. Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about you all?
I think we're doing pretty good. You know, It's that time of the year is the holiday season. Everyone's getting all ramped up for Christmas. Everybody's talking, is it a brown Christmas? Is it a white Christmas? Let's talk about some of the forecast here. Let's start in eastern and central Canada. What do you kind of see on the horizon right now when it comes to the weather pattern?
Kind of the biggest tipping point, if you want to call it that, not to make it sound dramatic, but it is going to be the pattern changer, if you will, should be coming between now and say January 15th. And by that, I mean, there's some activity that happens way up high above the pole. And how that area behaves late December, early January in this year's case, is really going to be telling on how much cold we can get to the east or the central areas and how much moisture. Right now, as you know, Canada's been warm. I mean, it's been a very warm fall, warm winters thus far. So we're trying to break that down. And if the it's polar vortex area, but if that can cause a change to change the pattern we're in now, it should be between now and the next couple of weeks.
Okay, so where's that cold air? It's going to come from the north down and push it lower, or what?
So yeah, basically everything in the atmosphere bases on stretches and pulls. So where you stretch something, you got to contract somewhere else to make up the balance. It's always in balance. And we're seeing some behavior of way up above the pole. It kind of wants to stretch out. So over Canada, it would kind of shrink down and trap some cold air over us, basically. But this phenomenon has kind of toyed with us over the past couple of weeks. Sometimes it looks like it's going to do its thing, and it hasn't. But I think for kind of to set the tone for the rest of winter and next spring, we want this thing to do its deal, and we want to get some cooler air, and that can help some moisture too. I'm still kind of leaning toward a hot winter for Canada, and we'll see the next couple of weeks because it really needs to change if it's going to. It kind of will tell us the behavior for the rest of the winter and the spring based on the next couple of weeks.
Okay, that's interesting. So, because we have seen some, really untimely, really wet weather, especially when you get out to the Atlantic coast, like, talking to farmers in like Nova Scotia, and raining on like crazy every day, and sort of been real frustration getting through that corn harvest. So that it's been kind of a settling of warm air, and then moisture's kind of come at the same time.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of these systems are riding from, say, the Gulf of Mexico across Florida, up the eastern seaboard of the States, and then hitting, far eastern Canada. There's some other factors too, but that's kind of been one storm flow. And then a secondary one are some storms that kind of hit around Montana, North Dakota, go across the prairies, head north of the Great Lakes. So there's kind of a coming together, kind of a flow coming together there over the east. And that would change too if this temperature pattern would change over the next couple of weeks.
So does that same pattern or the same conditions that we're seeing in central Canada, say in Ontario, is that carrying down through the Eastern Corn Belt as well?
It does. We're not getting the moisture down there, but it is all connected.
Okay.
And if we go back to the scenario between now and the next few weeks, is if we can somehow change this pattern over Canada, it would take that Eastern Canadian water, moisture, put it over the Corn Belt for a time, and then over southeastern states. So it would it would act to drop everything or sink it down farther south over the coming weeks.
Okay. Now that we can come back to the eastern side of the continent a little bit later, but I got to ask you, what the heck is going on the western side of the continent? I remember I saw you last year. That's where I first met you, was at the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, the Cattle Con last year. And there was a lot of enthusiasm when it comes to this La Nina switch. And you said you don't really kind of know when it moisture will show itself because of that switch. Matt, we are dry again.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, man, there is a boatload of concern with this warmer winter. There's a lot of people, even in northern Saskatchewan, talking about brown Christmas. Everyone's kind of scratching their head, like, what is in front of us here in 24?
Well, when we bring up the discussion of El Nino or La Nina, the impact, the correlation to weather is much higher on the states than it is Canada.
Okay.
El Nino has some impact, central west. Most of that impact is winter and spring, and that impact is to keep things warmer. La Nina is really when we get the sharper cold, the cold that just won't budge. And La Nina used to be a good snow producer for the West and the mountains and Peace region down through the prairies. It used to be. And I'm not saying we're not going back to that. There's other big factors that would take 3 hours for you and I to go through. But since about 1998, we've seen kind of a global pattern change where La Nina is favored. And for Canada, part of that would be, well, we're going to get more snow. But part of that change around 98 was, no, the La Ninas going forward will be drier. And then say 2030, whenever the global pattern shifts again, we'll start getting back into that tradition. But with that said, El Nino can bring really good moisture to southern BC. It can bring snow into the mountains. And I say can with put it in italics, bold, underline with the stars on either side. Okay.
Yeah.
Because the strength of El Nino is so critical. The strength of El Nino, and I'm talking about how much the atmosphere responds to this ocean pattern. If it's really full bore, like the atmosphere is like, I'm going to be the strongest Nino atmosphere ever, look out, you're going to be hot and you're going to be dry in the prairies in the west. And then as you work down that in weaker El Ninos on down to maybe moderate or neutral, almost no El Nino signature, that's when you do better with getting moisture to the prairies, the mountains, British Columbia, in the winter and spring. And this year, as you kind of already probably have guessed, with people saying it's hot and we're around Christmas, you can see where we're headed. We're in like a top, not quite top 5 as of today, but we're in a top 10 kind of Nino atmosphere. And that's really showing its drying, warming impact on us over the last couple of weeks. And that's likely to continue.
So are we locked in on that? Is that like, because we're all, one thing I've learned in talking to people like yourself is that, we're always cheering, depending on how much we like the current situation, we're cheering for the events that have to happen to create that alternate path, right? So is this like a locked in thing, or are there opportunities for certain things to happen to shift the pattern?
Well, this El Nino is going to be very short lived. It'll fade out really fast this spring. By summer, we may have La Nina back or headed quickly in that direction. So no, this pattern is not locked in. I mean, it is kind of for the winter.
Yeah.
We'll see a transition in the spring and summer. And then by this time next year, we're likely in a full bore La Nina. And that goes back to, I say, all the time. 1998, that was a critical time when the global pattern just shifts, and these things take decades to transition. But since that period, La Nina is far more common. It lasts a lot longer. El Ninos are weaker. So this El Nino will go away. And for me, a lot of time we talk about getting locked into a pattern. Like we're locked into La Nina. That's when we see the impact. I'm a transitions guy. I like the periods when, whether it's El Nino or La Nina or any other weather oscillation pattern, I like those transitional periods. The transition is a time when our opportunity for water is highest, in my opinion.
Okay.
So as we go from the transition from this El Nino this winter, okay, so spring would be a transitional period and part of the summer too. That's going to be a chance for us to not say we're El Nino. We're not saying we're La Nina, and we can get some water into the prairies. And that'll probably be the best chance for a spring and early summer.
We're basically cheering for the opportunity for chaos in that gray area, that gray zone.
Yeah. I like transitions. And that's the same down here where I am in the Rockies. A transitional part of the phase does more for me than being locked into one phase or the other. It's the change.
Is it kind of the western half of the are we all kind of in the same boat in the western half of North America? Like as you go from Alberta, Saskatchewan, Montana through Idaho, Utah, down through Colorado and into Texas, are we all kind of in the same boat? But obviously there's different levels of significance to the pattern, but are we all kind of dry?
Yeah. Like when we're full in an El Nino, you're going to do better from, say, central Colorado south to Mexico. There's going to be water there. North of Denver, Cheyenne, up through Montana, up to Calgary, Edmonton, Peace region. Those areas typically are drier with El Ninos. But the transitional phase, like when there's not one dominating, that's when everybody kind of along the Rocky Mountain chain, we're pretty darn similar. We're pretty similar in those cases. Other than down in Arizona, they get the monsoon late summer, and that can spread it into Mexico, Utah, Colorado. But just by and large, we're in a similar boat. The mountains are a lot of that.
Arizona did not get the late summer monsoon this year, just got more and more heat.
Just locked in the heat and sent the rain just a little bit to the west there.
Nutrient efficiency is rooted in your soil. Harness those nutrients with fertility services from Farmer's Edge, giving you access to our cutting-edge soil testing laboratory for highly accurate and timely analysis of your fields. Find out more at farmersedge.ca/laboratory. Okay, we're going to continue our conversation with Matt Makens of Makens Weather. When we come back, you're listening to RealAg Radio.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground, we are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
As you look ahead to the next growing season, there's a lot to consider when it comes to your crop. You need every possible advantage available to you. The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com has everything you need to make the best choice for you and your farm. On-demand videos with leading industry experts, available anywhere, anytime. Go into the season confident and ready with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com.
going to continue our conversation about some of the weather patterns we're experiencing in Canada and the U.S. with Matt Makens of Makens Weather. But first, I want to tell you about the new Oxbow cereal broadleaf herbicide from New Farm. Oxbow is powered by duplastin technology that is a workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds in wheat and barley. You can find out more by going to newfarm.ca. What changed so you mentioned this 1998. So why is that? You explained like what happened after the fact, but what was the creation of that change?
Let's think of El Nino and La Nina for a minute. That is a phenomenon in the right along the equator of the Pacific Ocean. And when you warm it by a couple of degrees Celsius or cool it from average for a couple of degrees Celsius, that's when you get El Nino and La Nina. And that happens like 12 months, 18, 24 months on a scale like that. But as you look at the Pacific, mostly northern Pacific, and Atlantic, mostly northern Atlantic, there are these pockets where there's hotter than normal ocean and colder than normal ocean. And they kind of lock into a phase, if you will. And gradually over time, maybe those two blobs switch places. Mm-hmm. That creates a different atmosphere above it, because it's like a fuel source or robbing energy from the atmosphere, if you will. Those big ocean basins, they happen on timescales, not like El Nino or La Nina of a year or two or three. These are 20 or 30 or 40-year patterns. Very slow, but they're referred to, I talk about them in speeches, some other weather guys do too. They're called the PDO and the AMO. Their phases dictate how much drought we may be in. And there was a critical change to the Atlantic in the late 90s. It changed its phase. It changed its orientation of cooler pockets of water, and that changed the atmosphere. And again, it takes about 20, 30, maybe 35, 40 years for these things to flip back. And for Canada and a lot of the U.S., especially our grain production areas and cattle areas.
Yeah, the wheat belt, for sure.
For sure. We need that Atlantic to flip, and that puts us in a wetter regime. How it is now, drought is far more common from, say, our cereal grains, cattle, up through your prairies. We're kind of locked into a more frequent drought phase. And that happened around the late 90s. And there's some other things, too. There's some correlation to solar cycles and things. But, but it's a big global pattern changer with those two big ocean basins.
So basically warm winter, and then as we move into spring, that's our transition, our opportunity for change. We could, if everything goes right, we're essentially cheering for maybe a bit of a late spring. If this pattern was to change, we actually might get some moisture.
Yeah. I think temperatures, January, perhaps times of February, BC, the Northwest, parts of Alberta, parts of Saskatchewan, you may get some shots of cold. So don't think you're not going to get some winter.
Yeah.
But it's, the odds are very warm. Warmer as you go east, and that will stay through spring and summer. What will change is some of these pockets of real dry air and the very wet air, they'll start to moderate a bit. So we'll spread out the playing field, if you will. We'll bring in some moisture to the prairies. Probably not like a surplus, like, whoa, back up, we got too much. Probably not that kind of case, but enough to be like, okay, we're timing out okay. Grains are coming up. We're warm. We're needing that next dose of moisture. We may get it. I think, dugouts, stock water, stream flows, that's probably not favorable. But to get some moisture in spring and early summer, it does look like we'll get some pockets coming back through.
Matt, really appreciate you joining us here today. We are cheering for the best possible news that we can get in some of these parts, especially the western half of North America. We really appreciate you joining us, and we'll chat with you again soon. Merry Christmas to you.
Sounds good. Merry Christmas.
Fingers crossed, toes crossed, arms, I'm crossing my eyes for the fact that we need some moisture early in the spring. Timing is critical. You know this already. But if, we get average precipitation in 2024 on the Western Canadian prairies, really the western half of the U.S. But that comes July onward, we're cooked. We need moisture early. I'm encouraged there by what Matt had to say. This transition, there's an opportunity for some disruption, some chaos, right? Some unpredictability. Let's hope that brings that, like, I know where I am in Lethbridge in southern Alberta. We're cheering full stuff. Like, whatever the weather is now, it's great. It's, it's relatively warm, kind of mild for December, but we're cheering, absolutely cheering for that big, wet snowfall early spring. Like, bring it. April, March, April. Let it be a massive dump. Wet, thick, heavy. The kind of snow where you don't even want to go out and shovel it because it's so hard on the back. That's the kind of snow that we're looking for, because that's the kind of moisture at that time that soaks in and will get us off to a great start. Timing is absolutely critical for farmers, and maybe even more so for the pasture land that is out there in some of the grass conditions. So hopefully Matt said what you kind of wanted to hear. It was definitely more positive than I thought. I was hoping that it wasn't going to be, no, we're locked in and this is a dry bias and we're doomed. I'm glad he didn't say that. So we're not out of the woods yet, but at least some encouraging news heading into Christmas here. You know what? Last minute Christmas wish with Santa. Pray for some better weather. Say, Santa, come on, come through. One extra cookie, maybe another glass of milk. Deliver some weather and late Christmas gifts, please, Santa. Okay, let's take a break, and we're going to change things up. We've got a beef market update here for you today. That's right, we talked weather. Now we're going to talk about the cattle markets. And Wasko is here with the Gateway Livestock Exchange, and we'll chat with her next.
There's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup to weed control, field trial results, and the latest yield strategies. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast in your favorite podcast app. Check out the latest Corn School episode today.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Time now to talk about the beef markets on the beef market update. And yeah, you're like, wait a minute, it's Wednesday. That's okay. It's the holiday season. Things are just jumbled up to no end around here. We're joined right now by Ann Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Ann, great to chat with you.
Yes, good to be here, Shaun.
You don't mind the Wednesday appearance? You're okay with it?
Well, no, it changes up what we talk about a little bit, but that's just fine.
Yeah, because we're kind of midweek here. Not only are we up against Christmas, but we're midweek. Thin trade at this point. Any indications on the cash market here for this last week before Christmas?
Well, hopefully we can get on a little better footing. Last week in the U.S., of course, markets were off, and the average was just shy of that 169 U.S. So sellers are, I think this week are going to certainly be looking to get back on top of that 170 or better. So we'll see, and we're certainly still expecting to see that happen. The cutout is lower so far. We're only, like I said, this is just last night. So Tuesday night's close at 289, but that's already about $3.50 lower than last week. But I guess, Shaun, if you want to look at the other side of a lower cutout, this is giving good value for retailers, especially at this time of year, to offer some good beef features, especially south of the border. In the U.S., we're seeing some good features, especially on middle meats going into the Christmas, New Year season. So we might be kind of kicking our toes in the dirt with this lower cutout, but it is moving some beef, I think, and we'll find this out more as we get into the Christmas season and beyond. locally in Alberta, also no trade, obviously, but last week the market was under some pressure. 370 delivered was kind of the dressed market, which gave an average of around that 220. I don't know if we've got any expectations of better trade this week in Alberta. It looks like packers are extremely well bought and really don't need to make any moves until well into the new year. So I think we're kind of stuck on holding mode there. So that's kind of the wrap on cash, and looking at some better money hopefully in the south this week.
Yeah, we've definitely got supply to move. Like getting back to that retail scenario, we got to push some beef through the system.
Yeah. So and I think it's all going to work out. Like I say, some good features that we haven't seen in some time. So it's good.
Beef is saying, "Look out, turkey! We're here. we're here to compete, turkey."
Exactly.
Yeah. It goes better with a glass of red wine. Doesn't make you tired afterwards. There's a whole bunch of selling features. Okay. I've always wanted to be the person in the grocery store that's like does the sampling and like tries to sell people on buying certain things. It's kind of the sales guy in me. Okay.
Yeah, you've missed your calling. Yes.
Yeah. Costco sample person. Okay, let's get into some of the cattle on feed numbers. Last Friday we had the Alberta cattle on feed. This Friday we have the U.S. cattle on feed. So let's start with Alberta first.
Yeah, so last week, Canfax released the Western Canadian on-feed report for DIS1. No change from last year compared to the 5-year average, just to kind of look at a broader picture, up 4%. So that's not a surprise. We saw those big placements, so we do know our on-feed numbers are still inflated. Placements in November, though, down 16% from last year. And again, if you recall the big placements that we talked about, even going back to late summer and especially right into September, big placements early on, it makes sense that here as we finish off the year, we're going to see smaller placements. It's just when you move them early, they aren't there to move later, and that's exactly what we see coming out of this data. The heifer placement piece, because we've been watching that one so close, also down 17%. In November. So kind of everything down, which steer placements were down 15%. So it all kind of was in tandem, if you will. Just to, kind of finish off on the numbers, especially in November, the Canadian fed slaughter in November was down 11%. And we saw those smaller kills all through the month, and they still are continuing here in December. And that was the smallest November fed cattle slaughter we'd seen in Canada since 2019. On the flip side, Shaun, Canadian cow kill in November was up 6%. And that was the biggest November cow kill we've seen since 2011. So you can see packers were still busy, but they were certainly working on a different class of cattle as we went through the month of November.
Is there is there a point where that cow slaughter number can't go up?
There's no such word as can't.
Okay. Well, you know what I mean? Like, it just seems like every time we chat about this kind of stuff, the cow slaughter is up. The cow slaughter is strong. That, like, at some point, don't we hit, like, some diminishing, like, we're like, okay, like, we just don't have the volume of cow. I guess you could kill every single cow that is on in the country, but that's not going to happen. Like, is there any expectation of when or any sign of that slowing down?
Well, and again, this is November's your biggest month anyways of the year. So typically, there's a seasonal thing, but even that's compared to, it was a big November, no question about it. You're right. We're dipping into the supplies, way beyond what we thought we would, but drought has certainly been charging that. So the question in 24, Shaun, is, and we'll talk about this in a second, but just what does weather do to allow some of these trends to change that we've really been stuck in for quite some time?
Yeah.
I did want to just finish before we leave the on-feed story.
Go ahead.
People wanting the idea for what the trade is looking at in the U.S. for Friday's report. On-feed estimates for this Friday in the U.S. for December 1 up 2%. November placements down 4%, and November marketing's also down 7%. So that's what's going to get placed in the market or is in the market as we head into Friday.
I wanted to hit on feeder cattle imports.
Yeah, I don't think we touched on this 2 weeks ago because it came in a little later, but everybody always likes to watch these numbers. Feeder imports into Canada from the U.S. this year are up 12%. We're sitting, that's up to October, so we're sitting at about 250,000, still with 2 months to go. I think we're going to easily crack the 300,000 number because we've been averaging over 30,000 head a month so far. And given the fact that we're going to only export about 125,000 head, we're still going to be certainly a net importer, like I say, to the tune of pretty close to 200,000 head. So oof. That's a storyline that I think we still need to, especially as you start to hear, different stories about trade and movement. And we've talked about this often on this show, but just a clear reminder of movement both directions.
Yeah, no kidding. Boy, it's like a pipeline that we've built of U.S. feeder cattle coming north.
Big time, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Let's talk about 2024. And in the past, we've done Anne's Christmas wish list. We can phrase it any way that we want to. Key signals, key indicators, things that you think are just absolutely the prime things we need to be focused on as we look at this market in the first half, at least, of 2024?
Well, I guess whenever I look forward, I also like to look backwards just as a reminder of how we got where we got in 23. And, beef production in both countries, both the U.S. and Canada, are going to end 2023 down about 5%. So pretty significant decline. And, between that and really solid demand for beef, especially through the first half of 23, and maybe, certainly has lost some ground here later on, that's what's led us to the record prices that we've seen really on all classes of cattle in 23. So now we flip into the calendar year of 24. We're going to see another decline in production in both countries of between 4 and 5%. So now the biggest question centers around demand and what happens with demand. So that's still a big factor. Drought, I think, is if I had to put something out there, it's still certainly the number one thing, especially where I live, in terms of what we're going to be looking for. And I know you've recently talked to Matt Makens on the show, meteorologist, and I certainly as we look at conditions today, we certainly hope that there is some moisture coming. It's been an extremely warm, dry winter in Western Canada, and that piece has to change for any of these other pieces we've been talking about to change. Profitability has been overall really good in 23. I think volatility, especially the last few months, has reminded us just how quick markets can react. And so I think to being prudent in terms of managing risk, price risk, production risk, any feed risk, whatever you might need to cover, I think thinking ahead rather than kind of just assuming the markets are going to be okay is an important thing to watch. I think prices are higher again in 24, but the ranges could be wider. Bigger highs, bigger lows. So manage accordingly, I guess is how I'd leave it.
You mentioned the margins in the cow-calf sector. And I was talking to a good friend of mine that has pairs in Manitoba. And we were talking last week about how margins have been good, but it's not like don't fall into the we need some carry through of that. There wasn't this glorious pot of money that was made last year that we're not buying Lambos and buying a whole bunch more grass. It needs to sustain itself going forward. If we are going to give ourselves a chance in combination with hopefully some more moisture, that all has to all that stuff is very connected in order for us to eventually say, hey, you know what? Need to retain some more heifers, right?
Yeah. Weather and profitability, not just a one-year wonder, right?
Yep.
Like we've seen. We need, as you've just stated, some sustainability in those two pieces. So we truly expect and hope that to happen, but at the same time, you can't just blatantly expect it to happen. So there's ways to manage risk on the way up as well. And I think that's what producers need to be thinking about as we head into 24. But you're right. Your producer friend is certainly right in terms of we need more than the one-year wonder of 23.
Yeah, and we talked about demand here from a domestic standpoint in Canada and the U.S., and really the consumer has really sustained demand through what, I probably would have taken the under, to be honest with you, with, interest rates going up and affordability being such an issue. The consumers really played their part to continue to, at the grocery store, pick up that piece of beef to grill over the weekend. But also, we need the export markets to really pull through. And that might be even a little bit more of the shaky side of it, right? Is like Canada could really afford to get more beef into places like Japan, or like I even think about China. Like that's just not been a thing.
Yeah, and that's been a no-go for several years now. But even if the U.S. could pick up on some demand into China, but you're right, the Asian markets are something that I think, the whole demand piece, I don't think we're out of the woods in 2024, even on a domestic consumer. I still think we've got a sticky year from an economic perspective ahead.
Yeah.
So that's still, I think, up for debate, or there's still some concern. But you're right, on the export markets, Asian markets have been certainly disappointing for both countries. And I don't, that's the piece that I feel maybe a little less comfortable suggesting that we can gain it back when we've got smaller production and higher prices. It's our product is, certainly more expensive to sell into those markets. And that showed up in 23. It's even going to be more exaggerated in 24.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I agree with you. And I just want to wish you a Merry Christmas. It's been great to chat with you every 2 weeks here throughout 2023, and can't wait to do it all over again in 2024. So Merry Christmas.
Well, Merry Christmas to you and your family and to all the listeners. Thank you so much for having me, and we'll talk to you in 24.
Every seed starts a story. Each farming year is a story to be told. Make Alliance Seed part of your story in 2024. Learn more at allianceseed.com. Let's take a break, and when we come back on RealAg Radio, we'll get to some of the top ag news stories of the day. I get to spend every day talking to farmers in the ag industry through RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio. But nothing is more fun than speaking to an audience live and in person. If you're planning an ag event, book a Real Agriculture speaker to make it a successful and memorable experience. Email shaney@realagriculture.com and you can book myself or any other Real Ag personality to speak at your event. Bring your audience all the fun, insight, and energy of Real Agriculture.
Whether you're a rookie soybean grower or a seasoned vet, the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com has exactly what you need to stay in the game. The latest research and the best agronomic advice from industry experts, along with local and global market coverage on demand, anywhere, anytime. Make this growing season your best growing season with the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com.
Let's get now to the top ag news stories of the day. A lot happening in Canada and beyond. This segment's brought to you by FP Genetics, innovative seed genetics for Canadian farmers. Contact your local FP seed dealer or territory manager to discuss your certified seed strategy specific to your region. Visit fpgenetics.ca to learn more. Okay, let's hop into the top ag news stories of the day. Up first, a story in the Globe and Mail written by Matt Lundy. He says, the big economic story for the coming year is the path of interest rates, with the U.S. Federal Reserve projecting 3/4 point cuts in 2024. Naturally, people are wondering how the Bank of Canada will handle the process, including those that are set to renew their mortgages. And rightly so, by the way. As of Tuesday, markets are pricing in the first rate cut at the Bank of Canada's April meeting, followed by another 3/4 point cuts by October. The first bank decision was made on January 24th. Still, the central bank has been careful not to engage in any discussion of rate cuts for the most part, and instead has stressed the importance of seeing more progress in controlling inflation. And, like we saw this week, inflation holding. So, but I have heard on Bloomberg Radio, don't get too far ahead of yourself here, okay? Don't just price it in and don't just assume, hey, rates are going to be like 3-4 cuts here in 24. What if it does not happen, right? Some people thought it would happen in the back half of 23. So don't just jump in the narrative. Do some contrarian thinking as well. Groups representing food suppliers and independent grocers are accusing Loblaw CEO Chairman Galen Weston of providing inaccurate information to members of Parliament this month amid a continuing dispute over a code of conduct for the grocery industry. Story in the Globe. Discussions have dragged on for more than 2 years as industry groups have worked to develop a code which would govern relationships between grocery retailers and their suppliers. But in recent months, two of the largest grocers in the country, Loblaws and Walmart, have said they will not sign the code in its current form. Railroads and their shipping partners are urgently requesting the swift reopening of several bridges along the U.S.-Mexico border that were recently closed by American immigration authorities. These closures were implemented as a response to a significant increase in illegal migration, which has placed immense strain on border communities in Texas, Arizona, and California. Customs and Border Protection made the unusual decision to close two railway bridges in Texas, including a major one in Eagles Pass that plays a crucial role in cross-border commerce. The closure is having a significant impact on the transportation of grains and oilseeds, which are essential commodities for one of the United States' most important export markets and trading partners. And I'm wondering here if this is going to impact Canadian canola as well, going to Mexico. You think so. If it's impacting U.S. soybeans or some of the canola, then you would think it's also going to impact Canadian canola going into Mexico. And that Union Pacific, the railway that is big time impacted there. One of the signals a lot of people use in terms of how is the economy doing is looking at the earnings of UPS and FedEx, okay? Now, FedEx reported earnings this week, and they reported profit below analyst expectations as costs cuts weren't enough to make up for the volume declines at the air freight unit amid a lingering cargo recession. The company lowered its sales forecast by fiscal year ending May 31st. The decline in revenue was led by FedEx's largest unit, Express, hurt by lower volumes and fuel surcharges. The stock was down like 11%, I believe, today or yesterday. So that's a pretty sharp decrease for company of that magnitude. When it comes to the new farm bill in the United States, at best, this is a March issue, according to Pro Farmer. But as previously noted, House Democrats sense New York restricting may provide them the seats needed to regain control of the chamber in 2025. That may lead Democrats to drag their feet relative to inking a new farm bill in the calendar year of 2024. As for the bill itself, answers to key topics are just as from solution as ever, including additional funding and policy issues. You know, we've heard about the movement of people out of the state of California. Also, right now, there's CBC had a story yesterday about huge volumes of people moving from all over Canada into Alberta. Well, when it comes to the U.S., there's a massive amount of people moving out of California. They're going to states like Montana. They're going to states like Utah, Idaho, Texas, Wyoming. And I remember The Economist one time said Texifornia was like the headline on the front page of The Economist. Wealthiest Californians are fleeing the state. In reversal from past decades, more college graduates and professionals are moving out of California than coming into it to escape the higher taxes and cost of living, and it is cutting into tax revenues that are hurting state and local governments. Moody's Analytics economist Mark Zandi analyzed moves in and out of California for the LAT using Equifax credit data to zero in on the age of the movers. He found that since the pandemic in early 2020, California has lost residents in every age group, but by a significant margin. The biggest net out migration came from those 35 to 44 years old. Brazil has overtaken the U.S. in corn shipments to China. It extends lead for soybeans as well. Brazil overtook the U.S. in November to become China's biggest corn supplier this year. China imported 3.2 million metric tons of corn from Brazil last month, pushing the tally for the first 11 months of 2023 to 8.8 million metric tons, 39.7% of its total. You know, this is going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. And that's Brazil. I'm also interested, we were talking to Jim Wiesmeyer about this last week, when it comes to Argentina. And what do they do when it comes relative to some of their exports as well? And China has done a very good job of cozying up to both those two South American countries. This is something that I think it becomes a little bit more difficult for Canada and the U.S. when it comes to some of these agricultural commodities. When we are competing with Brazil or Argentina, there's some political lanes there that China sees as very strategic. And that could be a real threat. to some of the exports in 24. If you have any feedback on today's show, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You also could call the Real Ag feedback line. The number there, of course, is 855-776-6147. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Radio. And we'll, of course, chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this episode of the Real Ag Radio podcast, brought to you by the BC Centre for Agritech Innovation at Simon Fraser University, your go-to for advancing agritech. Ready to elevate your farm business? Achieve the productivity and profitability you're looking for with Agritech Development Program. Google SFU Agritech Innovation to learn more.